Good morning, everybody. Welcome to NTWC Live special report for Friday, the 27th day of August. We don't like doing these special reports because that means there's something going on, something that's probably going to impact land. But here we are nonetheless because we've got something that's going to have a significant impact on land over the course of the next few days. We've got an all-star cast for you today. Bill Reed is with us. Al Needham is here and Jim Costin is here. And we're going to talk about this storm named Ida that is strengthening as we speak. And boy, I tell you what, folks in Louisiana bracing for yet another hit. We thought 2020 was bad, and here we go again with 2021. So let's get right to Bill Reed for an update on the storm itself. Then we'll get Hal and Jim involved in the conversation. Bill, good morning.
Morning, Tim, and everybody. Thanks for joining us. A potentially very serious event is getting ready to unfold once again in the Gulf of Mexico, and I'll get right to the slides here. We didn't test this, Alex. I hope it works. Yeah. You should be seeing a nice satellite loop right now.
Yes. Yes, sir. Okay,
we're good. This is the latest things. One is much better organization and much stronger convection than we saw yesterday. Still looks very tropical stormish with the bulk of the convection on the east side, but this one big burst of convection is on the north side where the core of the storm is probably developing. I'll show a radar from Cayman in a little while on that. Other features of interest, there's a trough of low pressure that's been imparting a little bit of southwesterly shear, which might explain the lack of convection down there. It's moving into the central Gulf of Mexico and looks to be weakening now and is forecast to continue to do so. There's two minor disturbances traveling along in the eastern flow south of this big subtropical high that's been anchored over the entire southern U.S. for about a week now. This is actually a very important feature up here. As this shortwave drops across the northern tier of states, it's forecast to do a number of things. One, it'll amplify the ridge out ahead of it, which will amplify a trough downstream, which will induce a more northwesterly flow instead of southeasterly flow, I'm sorry, rather than an easterly flow. In the path the storm's going on, there'll be a weakness over Texas and the high building back behind the trough as it exits. And that sets the stage for the steering that we'll be looking at with the system. The outflow is also quite evident now in the cirrus in all directions, except maybe a little bit to the south. But even there, I'm starting to see some outflow on our storm. This is the radar out of Grand Cayman. It's a nice new Doppler radar, and been watching the loop all morning. And the thing that was most dramatic to me is a relatively ragged center has now evolved into what looks like the development, perhaps, of the northern half of an eye wall towards the end of this loop as the system approaches the Isle of Youth in the next few hours. We're going to get out of range of them sometime today and try to get the Cuban radars to give us a look at it there. We're flying the storm. Several planes have been out. We're also doing an environmental mission, catching the central data on this. But the winds have been increasing in my eye with each run, especially here on the southeast quadrant, backside of the system in there. So we're getting a better definition on the center, which is noted by everybody that's been forecasting it and seeing this data. A little bit about the track forecast. This is a graphic on tropical tidbits that I like to use. It combines the 850 vorticity, the 500 millibar height lines, and the winds at 200 millibars. It always takes some getting used to when I first look at it. So never mind the confusion. I'll just try to point out a few things. Starting out, the data show the anticyclone a little displaced from the center with the outflow in all directions, but the southwest at the 12Z time frame. Here's that trough in the central Gulf and the big ridge of high pressure over the U.S. And as you step forward in time, you see the amplification and the turn to more southeasterly steering as the storm moves northward in the Gulf, and that's what will keep it on track for Louisiana. There's still some slight risk that it might drift further east, but I think we're getting more locked in on the Louisiana landfall at this stage of the game. And then it gets caught in the westerlies and becomes another serious rainmaker across the south and into the Appalachians as we get into next week. Here is the latest guidance, and it's extremely consistent model to model. It doesn't matter which model you want to choose. They all have the same basic solution between 48 and 60 hours of landfall in southeast to south central Louisiana coast, with it turned back into the westerlies after landfall. The intensity guidance, I guess got this, so I'm sort of making this up as I go, but again, it looks stronger on the guidance than it did on the previous run, with the dominant trend in most of the models now in the high Cat 2 through Cat 3 with an outlier Cat 4 and a few other models down in the Cat 1. All of them bring it to a hurricane, and all of them show rapid intensification, the steep slope, pretty much from now until approaching landfall. And I think one of our big concerns going forward is going to be how much rapid intensification and just how big and strong is this storm going to get. Okay. Here's one of the issues on the intensification. Of course, this is not unusual. This shows very warm water across the northern Gulf. It is slightly higher than the new average temperatures, which would make it somewhat more significantly higher than the old normal that we used to compare it to, but not that anomalously warm. It's just that time of year when we get upper 80s to near 90s across this part of the Gulf of Mexico. Find the other thing. The ocean heat content. Okay. And we'll get up here to today. Whoops, there we go. This is one of Jim's areas of expertise. It's always very high content down in the Northwest Caribbean, so it's no surprise that the storm's feeding on a good transfer of heat from the ocean into the storm now. But if you'll notice, there's a pocket of deep warm water now off in the north central Gulf of Mexico that the storm's going to track right over during the day on Saturday, and it'll be very interesting to see just how much increase in intensity gets imparted by that. We don't always see that. Sometimes we see a storm pass through there and nothing happens, and then other times, like Katrina, they go big time. And with all the other factors looking positive, I'd be leaning towards going big time at the way we are now. Whoops! Well, there I go. I hit the wrong button. You're going to have to pardon me while I fix my, I deleted what I wanted to talk about. You shouldn't let 70-year-old people operate computers. Okay. All right. There we go. I'm back in business. Here's the latest forecast showing a stronger tropical storm now at 65 miles an hour. Will not surprise the forecasters or anybody else that during the afternoon it reaches hurricane intensity, even though it is crossing the Isle of Youth. It's still surrounded by very warm water. Will make landfall on the western side tip of Cuba and rather quickly transverse across the landmass without too much effect on intensity, and enter the Gulf of Mexico later tonight and continue moving northwestward through the day Saturday, and then it begins to slow down. Notice the distance between these is the gradient between the weakness in the high and a subtropical high weakens. So, and it's supposed to grow larger. The models have been very indicative of a favorable environment for increasing the size of the circulation. So it's already fairly sizable, and so we're looking at a potentially large major hurricane approaching the coast of Louisiana, and then making landfall Sunday night, perhaps early Monday if it slows down more, and then moving inland and producing a plethora of bad impacts as it does so. There's currently hurricane watches up along the coast from Sabine Pass over to the Mobile, Alabama, and a tropical storm watch tucked to the end, rest of Alabama going eastward. Warnings, of course, down here in Cuba for the storm. It's impacting them today. Fairly certain by tomorrow morning, maybe even the 5 a.m., 4 a.m. advisory that they'll hoist warnings for the Gulf Coast. We're getting, with the improved forecasting techniques, we ought to be able to issue the warnings now with a longer lead time. And that helps people with some of the legal logistics of getting their job done. Okay, now we'll talk a little bit about the impacts on that. I always like they call this the avocado product. Looks like a large avocado, but I like to overlay the wind speed probabilities with the timing. And in this case, I'm using the earliest reasonable. Normally I use the most likely, but it's so incredibly important that people in the low country along the North Gulf Coast act early, because every time we have a storm in there, we have stories of people that waited too long. So as early as tomorrow evening, adverse conditions will be approaching the Gulf Coast and enveloping the whole warning area, or watch and warning areas to go into the day on Saturday. Surge is obviously going to be a concern. This is a first glimpse at it. It's earlier than I would hold a lot of faith in. So I'll just show you this peak surge is a quick way to get an eyeful of what's going to happen. This will get adjusted as the forecast details change as the storm approaches the coast. But as far east as the border between Alabama and Florida, all the way back to Sabine Pass, the anticipation is a significant storm surge with the largest values where you'd expect to see them along and to the right of where the landfall occurs. 7 and 11 foot inundations in there. It's his area of expertise, and he's done some work over in the Mississippi area here in a minute. The wind, we know what we're looking at for the wind in there, and also the rainfall. With the storm slowing down, the likelihood of really excessive and extreme rainfall and the corresponding flash flooding exists. This is not been updated yet. I don't think that's still from the early morning run. We'll get an update in the afternoon package, but a large area of 10 to 15, that's the area in red in southeast Louisiana from this, and 5 to 10 or 6 to 10 all the way up into the northern parts of the deep south. Wouldn't be surprised to see some isolated totals approach 20 or maybe even exceed it if the storm is going to be as large as wet as we're thinking. Just a quick look at the map to get an idea of where the landfalls currently forecast somewhere in the Morgan City area. So anywhere from east of Lake Charles to the New Orleans area would still be areas I'd say are in the hunt on this thing. And this is a terrible trajectory for storm surge, obviously, and this area will trap a lot of water in a very low land. So we're going to see the results of that. So that's what I had on that. Jim, do you have anything you want to add on on what we're seeing with this storm?
Well, Bill, I think you certainly covered most of it. I mean, it's I think in terms of the size, that rapid intensification does very often lead to an eyewall replacement cycle. And I think that seems like there's a fairly high probability that we're going to see something like that. And that, of course, is what happened with Katrina in a very similar situation, moving over warm and fairly uniform SST and ocean heat content, and then rapid intensification to a point where it starts to develop that outer eye wall, and then you have a fairly rapid increase in size. And fortunately, also generally goes along with a reduction of your peak intensity, but the sizes could potentially have a lot of an effect on the surge, especially on that right-hand side.
Right. Yeah, I would think the speed of motion that the storm's taking is sufficient enough that probably won't see any beneficial cooling from upwelling that would affect the core of the storm.
Yeah, I think that with such deep warm water, and I think that's a warm eddy loop that's forming that hot spot there. And
that's correct. Yeah.
And so you've got Normally, if a storm starts to move more slowly, it's more likely to bring up that cooler water and sort of kill itself off. But this is a rough situation to have a storm that's slowing. And as you mentioned, that's going to increase the local rainfall amounts and also have such deep, warm water that it sits over, that that's not going to be detrimental to its intensity.
Yeah. I think we had this right, that the landfall was almost the same day as Katrina. The forecast, they were talking on the news.
Yeah, which ironically is my birthday.
Oh, well, joy. Yeah, mine goes with Hurricane Allen, August 10th. And I don't know what August 9th did for Tim. We got a bunch of August birthdays floating in this group.
I didn't know you were born in 1980, Bill. That's great.
Oh, yeah.
Could you unshare your screen, Bill?
I haven't aged well. I think I should have stayed away from the cheap beer.
So I don't remember 1980. It was my 21st birthday. Bill, you can unshare your screen. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. So Hal, given that the memory of Katrina is going to be in a lot of people's mind, and that there's going to be impact over there, based on what this storm forecast has, what are you looking at for the Mississippi, Southeast Louisiana coast?
Yeah, guys, August 29th is strange. We have the Katrina anniversary. And then for those of us that lived in Southeast Louisiana, it's the same anniversary as Hurricane Isaac as well. In 2012, parts of Lake Pontchartrain out by Laplace and some of those areas southeast of Baton Rouge actually saw the worst flooding on record from Isaac on the same date. So it's that time of the year that's really busy. Here, I'm going to share my screen real quick if it's possible. One of the big concerns is always getting into that area east of the Mississippi River levees in Southeast Louisiana and also along the Mississippi coast. This is the Hazard Area Likeliness Index that we keep these updated. It's really kind of taking the storm conditions and converting them into impacts. It may maybe look a little bit busy. The blue lines here are just the cone of uncertainty, basically. And then let me try to minimize that. It basically takes the hazards for wind and water and just quantifies them with wind at the highest and then rain and then storm surge. This is the likeliness of substantial damage. And so this is as of I believe the 5 a.m. forecast this morning. So really from Southwest Louisiana through the Mississippi coast, it was looking at possible substantial damage, which would be hurricane force winds at least 74 miles an hour. Rainfall for this map, we looked at the likeliness of 12 or more inches of rain. For several of these places here in Southeast Louisiana, we were looking at a possible 12 or more inches of rain. And then storm surge, as Bill was mentioning, really there's that 7 to 11 foot peak storm surge level for parts of coastal Mississippi over through Southeast Louisiana. This map here shows the likeliness that we'd have more than 9 feet of surge. We're saying possible for places like Grand Isle, possible over by Gulfport, Biloxi, but we're saying probable for the areas east of New Orleans and east of the Mississippi River over by Shell Beach, Louisiana, for example. What's really interesting, if we were to have a landfall in here by Grand Isle or over by Cocodrie, Homa, a lot of times actually the peak storm surge level will actually be east of the Mississippi River levees over here, over by Shell Beach, for example. I saw in Hurricane Ike, even though it made landfall in Texas, water levels were higher over by Shell Beach, over here at site number 17, than they were at Grand Isle, which is site number 16. There sometimes can be a bit of a storm surge shadow over here, over by Grand Isle of, blocking some of these, especially if you have really strong winds going from east to west. There can be a little bit of a reduction here in storm surge, but that said, where the eye wall makes landfall along the coast, if it's down by Grand Isle, Barataria Bay, you'll definitely see a localized peak there as well. So, but in general, as far as widespread surge, we kind of look here, the east of the Mississippi River levees here in Louisiana, and then getting over here to the southwest coast of Mississippi by past Christian, Bay St. Louis, those are the levels start to drop a bit. What we saw too in Lake Pontchartrain on the last forecast I saw was 4 to 6 feet of storm surge as well. And so this map is just the likeliness of substantial damage. And then this map is the likeliness of moderate damage, where we lower the wind threshold to 57 miles an hour. The reason we choose that, it appears that around 50 knots or 57 miles an hour you start to see a lot of tree falls, a lot of power outages, a lot of more cosmetic damage to buildings like the siding and shingles coming off. But it seems like you get more of the structural damage right around hurricane force winds. On this map, it's the likeliness of 57-mile-an-hour winds, 8 inches of rain, and 6 feet of surge. And for this, we're saying a probable surge of at least 6 feet from, Grand Isle, Cocodrie, up through Shell Beach, and all the way over to Gulfport and Biloxi. One last thing I wanted to share, I was talking to you guys before about a project that we just did that was funded by the Northern Gulf of Mexico Sentinel Site Cooperative in partnership with Dauphin Island Sea Lab. And these are just a few of the maps. We did a 2-year project in Biloxi where we actually built their first comprehensive coastal flood history, and then a lot of building elevation mapping. This is the elevation for about 1,200 buildings in Biloxi. And you can see here about 17% of the buildings are less than 12. And actually, right down here, this would be the Beau Rivage. At the very bottom of the screen is the Gulf of Mexico. And at the top of the screen is Biloxi Bay. So actually, it's a little bit counterintuitive. As you go closer to the bay or farther from the beach, you actually are getting lower lying houses. And so, we were able to look at building elevations in that project, as well as comparing those building elevations with, for example, Hurricane Katrina's inundation. We're not expecting anything like this. This was 23.79 feet of surge, and it was amazing. I mean, this is what Katrina flooded in Biloxi, and I think it came into 89% of the buildings had at least 4 feet of water in them. So just really interesting there to look at the flood history. A time series for flooding in Biloxi looks something like this, where we can see actually we have high water marks for 35 hurricanes and tropical storms since 1880. Katrina was the highest in 2005, Camille over here in 1969. I think with this storm, I mean, we might be, if the track stayed as we expected, most likely, I think we're looking at maybe a 6 to 7 foot surge in Biloxi. But again, that's very sensitive on the exact storm track. I was looking at the building elevations, and this is interesting because I think Biloxi, Gulfport, a lot of these cities may be similar. The building elevations really start around 8 feet. Also keep in mind, sea level is not at 0. On that system where we measure building elevation, sea level is around 0.6 feet. So as long as the storm surge, I think stays below 7 feet or so, I don't think we'll see a lot of buildings inundated along that part of coastal Mississippi. But it's very sensitive to storm surge in that part of the world. And, just something we're always concerned about. Obviously, Mississippi and that southeast part of Louisiana, very susceptible to big surges.
Fascinating. I like that graphic where you showed with the traffic light symbols on there. I hadn't seen that in a while. It came back to me just like that. So I think it's going to be useful for people to get a quick glance at what the risk is.
Yeah, and actually, I'll just bring that up one time because I had a lot of people inquiring from Texas this morning. And really, let me just explain that really quickly again. So this is looking at, for example, the likeliness of moderate damage. And so like today, we just upgraded, like city number 7 here is Port Arthur. So again, not really expecting the core of the hurricane winds, but, and this is based on the NHC wind probabilities. Port Arthur got more than a 10% chance of 50-knot winds. So, we changed that traffic light there at city number 7. That's wind speed at least 50 knots, 57 miles an hour. We upgraded that from unlikely, which is less than 10%, to possible this morning. And so just to explain how these traffic lights work, wind is at the highest part of the traffic light, rain is in the middle, surge is at the bottom, and this is your likeliness. If it's unlikely, it's less than 10%, possible is 10 to 50, probable is 50 to 90, and then likely is more than 90%. So, it was interesting looking at the substantial wind damage. I think Baton Rouge and New Orleans were both around 49%. So, we held them at possible this morning, but likely in the next advisory, we'll upgrade them from possible to probable. So it's just a way to help people understand likeliness of what they can expect in their location, and just really breaking down the hazards into wind, rain, and saltwater storm surge as well. So we'll just keep that updated through the storm, just giving people an idea of what's likely where they live.
Very nice. So Tim, we getting any questions?
Yeah, first, we're all impressed that you came up with an acronym for HAL. That's.
I tried my best not to do it. I couldn't think of any other name for it, though.
It worked out beautifully. A couple of questions online. Yes, Casper wants to know if anybody knows the depth the depth of the heat content in the loop eddy. Anybody have any idea what that is? I see a lot of heads shaking no.
No, I don't know offhand. It's
No.
not part of that graphic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends how it's defined. I think it's a 26 degree C thermo isoline of water temperature. I don't know the actual depth, but it's quite anomalously deep right now.
Okay. And another question from Barry. He wants to know when the last time we had a rapid intensification event moving toward this part of Louisiana at this angle. Does anybody remember an RI event like this? They're good questions. Make everybody think.
Yeah, close call, but Laura was parallel track just a little farther west, but it went through an RI for the last 24 hours before landfall.
What do you think it could do?
My gut is that the forecast for rapid intensification is conservative, given the number of things that could happen all at once. Some small reduction in the shear, the coming off of land. I don't think the topography is particularly thick at the western end of Cuba. And I think, moving over that warm water and then moving into progressively higher sea surface temperatures and higher ocean heat content, combined with a slackening of the shear, and then the fact that it's moving in between weather systems so that it's going to start to slow down. I think that's a recipe for potential explosive intensification.
Yeah, I'm on the exact same wavelength, same thought I was having it may sound humorous, but it's actually legit. I know these guys that are making the forecasts, and I can read their body language through how the discussion's written. I think the concern this morning was, and the last 2 or 3 discussions was that they may be conservative on this, and I wouldn't be surprised if they jump on it if it comes off Cuba stronger than they're looking at now.
We'll see them call clearly, in their discussion, they're overtly saying, we're calling for rapid intensification for 3 advisories in a row. You don't see that language very often.
You will soon. I think they're getting on the short-term forecasts of it. We're getting better at that. When I was there, it was like 1 out of 10 we might forecast correctly. It was just depressing. And I think on the short term, it's more like about 4 or 5 out of 10 that they've been hitting.
Got a couple other questions here. Go ahead.
I had a quick question. I've seen RI defined by the deepening of pressure. I've also seen some people use wind as a proxy. How have you guys seen that mostly as far as thresholds for RI and defining RI? Mostly, I would imagine, on the pressure drop, but have you seen some people using wind increase in the last 24 hours before landfall as well as a proxy?
That's pretty much, since NHC forecasts for wind, not pressure, that's actually correct. They use the wind.
Yeah.
But they use both. Internally, they're looking at both.
How would they define those thresholds? Is there an official threshold definition for so many mile an hour wind increase over 24 hours?
35.
5. Yeah, so 30 knots in 24 hours.
Got a couple other questions coming in. Barry wants to know how wind damage is defined based on average built structure or localized built structure. And there's a difference, like mobile homes versus well-constructed homes. How is wind damage defined?
I would say it's by the actual damage without consideration for how they were built. That's how I did it. I mean, if your house is destroyed, you really don't, at that point in time, you don't really care about the construction practice. Your house is damaged.
Right. And how Casper wants to know what the website is where the stoplights can be found. Is that publicly available?
Right now we are mostly posting it on social media, on Facebook through CNC Catastrophe and National Claims, or my own personal social media. But eventually these may be posted on a website. We're updating them at least twice daily, but hopefully it'll be more like 3 or 4 times daily. But those will be really, we're basing them off the NHC advisories with some interpretation for rain and surge as well.
Cool. Jim, I know you have to go. I don't know if you've had any final thoughts before you take off. It's 11 o'clock Central.
Thanks for pointing that out to me. It would have gone right by.
I hate for you to go, but I know you have to. Do you have any thoughts before you take off?
I think coming back to rapid intensification, because I think that's going to play such a major role in what happens in the next couple of days. There is quite a lot of evidence at this point that the likelihood of rapid intensification in the Atlantic and the Gulf is much higher now than it was 40 years ago. And we don't have to say why that's true, whether it's climate change or whether it's just natural variability, but the likelihood of it now is much higher. And I think that might circle back to what Bill was saying, that I think the forecasters, because it's becoming less rare of an event, they're a little bit more likely and willing to include that language in their forecast. And so we're sitting in kind of a new normal when it comes to rapid intensification, unfortunately, and this may be yet another example of that.
We've certainly seen a lot of it in the last couple of years. It's scary stuff. Jim, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. I know you got to go.
Really?
Thanks for spending time with us. And we'll stay out here a little while longer, but you can stay as long as you can. But I know you got to run.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Jim. So where are you headed? We talked before the show a little bit, but where are you headed to watch this storm?
Yeah, before I answer that real quick, just off of what Jim had said about rapid intensification, I'm running that shows how many times storms have intensified at least 40 miles an hour in the 24 hours before landfall. It's interesting. We've had 4 in the last 4 years. And previous to that, my data set starts in 1950. We've only had 9 since 1950, but in the first 50 years of the data set, it only happened 3 times. So from basically 1950 to 1999, it happened about once every 17 years. In the last 4 years, we've had it happen 4 times with Laura, Michael, Hannah, and what's the other? Harvey. So those were, 4 in the last 4 years. So it is a concern seeing these things blow up, as they're getting closer to landfall. As far as where I will be with this system, I live in Galveston. We're not expecting any big impacts here. I'll be heading east, probably to southeast Louisiana. Potentially it'll be on the ground in Terrebonne Parish near Houma. We do have a lot of interest in what's going on in coastal Mississippi as well. And we have some citizen scientists there on the ground measuring water levels. But we'll see. I'll keep everybody in touch with social media. I'd like to go to a place where I can document the wind and the flooding, hopefully see really the impacts as they happen, but obviously not put myself in harm's way. So always looking for a place to go that, I don't feel is putting myself in harm's way, but I could document the storm and really understand what's happening.
As a researcher, you don't like to see the same place get hit over and over and over again. But as a researcher, it helps your data that you go right back where you were last year a couple of times and find the people that you talked to last year and see a lot of the same stuff again.
Yeah, that's true. Louisiana has been hit so much. And I did my master's and PhD in South Louisiana, so I have a lot of relationships there. South Louisiana, I find it to be a challenging place for storm chasing because the coastline is so flat for such a long distance. The storm surge can move inland 15, 20 miles easily. And I like to get up in a parking garage or a structure like that. A lot of the towns there don't have anything like that. So it is a challenging chase area compared to, say, Galveston or Biloxi, where there's a whole bunch of parking garages and you can get up higher. South Louisiana, it's so low for so long. And that's another issue with this. When people hear about an 8 or 10 or 12-foot storm surge, those surges can go inland easily 15, 20 miles in South Louisiana. So definitely take care all along that Highway 90 corridor. Morgan City, Houma, Thibodaux, those areas can get a lot more surge than people realize sometimes.
Yeah, and along with that comes the snakes and the fire ants. I wouldn't want to be on the ground chasing there either.
Going back, the question that Barry asked about the damage, and he was talking specifically about the stoplight graphic, about how do you differentiate between moderate and substantial, and does it based on local building or
I think that's a great question. And in recent years, I grew up a weather geek, but in recent years, I've become more and more interested on storm impacts. And I really based that based on, some different storms I've been in. As I've been on the ground and observed different range of wind speeds, I've started to see consistency. Like last week, I was in Hurricane Grace in the Yucatan Peninsula. I think max winds were in the low to mid 80s. And, the damage looked a lot like they did in the western eye wall of Hurricane Sally on Dauphin Island when the winds were also in the low to mid 80s. Just a lot a lot of tree falls or above. What I noticed when I've been in stronger tropical storm force winds, like, you know, upper 50s to low 70s, is just you start to see a lot of siding peeling from homes. You start to see a lot of shingles off roof, but in general, and you start to see more tree falls. But generally, you're not really seeing like substantial structural damage to homes. The question comes up though: how do you define that? What is a home? Because building practices vary from one location to another, and even from one builder to another. And I saw on the ground last year after Hurricane Laura 2 subdivisions side by side. One was damaged very severely. The other had very little damage. And so these were probably Cat 3 winds in both subdivisions, but the impact was very different. So I think, you know, I do like the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. I think it was designed with wind impacts in mind, and I've seen it work pretty well. But getting into, you know, does this refer to a mobile home, something that's built standard, or there's even a better building standard out now called fortified that's very popular, for example, in South Alabama. Buildings that are fortified just are not seeing the wind damage that you're seeing from other buildings. So I would guess it's probably an average sample of, you know, what's an average single family residential building. But again, it's going to vary a bit when you're out there, depending on the building practice.
Good answer. I actually got a question for me. That's a rare thing. So I'll answer this question, and then, but I want you guys to chime in on a general sense. My question's a little specific to this area where I am, and the question is just: do we think there's still a chance for big storms coming to the Rio Grande Valley this hurricane season? And the answer is absolutely. We're still early in the season. You know, people say, but they always miss us, and they say, no, they almost always miss us. And it's that difference between almost all up the next month or so, and that's not a surprise. So yes, it's a possibility that something could impact this area, just like any area. Bill, where you are and how you guys are close together, same kind of thing.
Well, Tim,
as long as,
go ahead, Bill.
Sure, as long as the Atlantic Ridge keeps imposing its strength and we get that kind of what looks like a Central American gyre set up, the favorable area of the Western Caribbean, kind of what's set up last year, comes to mind. And until that goes away, if they form there, they got to go, when they get in the Gulf, they got to hit land somewhere. So, and everything's in play until that pattern dies.
Yeah.
Tim, you know, looking at the models last week for Hurricane Grace, I mean, some of those models had it coming over more towards Tampico or even north towards the border. And then early in the mix here with Ida, you know, some of those early models showed this as well, going, you know, towards the valley over there by the Rio Grande Valley. So it can always be in the mix. I'm amazed when I look at hurricane histories, how they'll be clustering. You know, you see like South Florida in the 1920s, South Carolina, the 1890s, now Louisiana. You know, you just get these places that for whatever reason, they're just getting a lot of storm hits. And often people to right and left say, oh, we're not going to get hit anymore. And it's just, I think there can be random clustering, but eventually, you know, we roll the dice and it comes out a little different. And places that have not been hit, eventually it's their turn again.
Right. And it's I'm always amazed that people are disappointed that a storm's going somewhere else, as people haven't been through one or not been through a significant storm, that they're like, oh, I can't believe another one's going to miss us. Well, yeah, that's, you know, we want that for us. It's bad for somebody else. But
Tim, when I was working in Galveston at the Historical Foundation, and one day a guy from South Padre Island, who was a coastal zone manager, was in Galveston. He said, could I see your flood data and your flood analysis for South Padre? He said, we're starting to see the flood risk levels drop because it's been so long since we've had a big hit. And he said, I'm aware of the big storms. You know, he was aware of Beulah in 1933. And, you know, when you look back in time, there's a lot of scary storms that have hit there. But I think South Padre up through Corpus, it's really been a while since they've had a direct hit.
it has been. You know, we had Allen in 1980, but even that, you know, that seemed recent when I first started working here, because it was recent when I first started working here, you know, and Bill, that was a long time ago, but yeah, really nothing huge since then. Brett, that went into the King Ranch, you know, a few years ago. And of course, Hannah last year, that was minimal. I never say minimal in a hurricane because it's still a hurricane, but you know, as hurricanes go. So yeah, we've been fortunate. Good question, Celeste. Thanks for asking. Barry just posted the link to the Fortified Home website on the discussion. So if you're watching and you're interested in more information on that, the link is there for the fortifiedhome.org website, or that is the website you can find it. So good stuff. A lot of great questions online today. Bill, I've been talking a while. Do you have anything you want to ask or add?
No, it's just that we try to keep these discussions light, but I want to enforce in people's mind that this is definitely a serious threat. and there's probably going to be bad news come out of wherever it makes landfall.
I think that's a good thought. And how we want you to be safe out there, buddy. Be very, very careful wherever you are, but you know that you've been there before.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd love to keep in touch with you guys from the field.
Yep. We'll stay in touch when we do another one of these. Well, we appreciate it, gentlemen. Great conversation. Thanks to Jim who had to take off. Thanks, Hal. Good job. You guys are going to get your NTWC Live bag tags that you can have on your bag when you come see us in person next April.